1, A Star Wars Story, is the latest Star Wars movie and the first movie that is not part of the main Star Wars saga, if you don't count the Clone Wars movie that came out in theaters in 2008, and if you don't count the Ewok TV movies. This movie is not Episode 8. It does not continue the adventures of Rey, Finn, and Poe. In fact, this movie takes place before the original Star Wars. I was actually a little surprised on how many people I have come across that were confused by the timing this movie takes place. Some people who were in line to see the movie thought this was Episode 8. So, if you haven't seen the movie, please note that this movie takes place in between Episode 3 and 4, and really, it is the opening crawl of Episode 4. Now, speaking of people who have not yet seen this movie, I should say this review will contain spoilers. This is your official spoiler alert. If you don't want spoilers or detailed plot points, then this is not the review you are looking for. Okay, so about a month prior to the movie, I had a discussion with a few friends about whether or not this movie would have an opening crawl. Initially, I was like, yeah, it better. It's Star Wars. And if you saw my Force Awakens review, then you know how much I care about those little Unity details. But then, as I thought about it, I told them, you know what? I don't think it will. And the more I thought about it, I was hoping it wouldn't. So we made a friendly wager, and then we went to see the movie. And then I saw those 10 magic words, a long time ago, in a galaxy far, far away. And I thought for sure that I had lost our bet. I mean, when I see those words, I can't help but wait with anticipation to hear the opening music blaring as the word Star Wars jumps off the screen. But instead, we get a kinda abrupt horn of some kind, and the film just starts. I don't mention this to say that I was right, though I was. I mention it because it stands out. I can see that some may take issue to this. It's different. It's not how Star Wars is supposed to be. But I think that's the point. You see, this is not a movie that is part of the main saga. This is a Star Wars story. In fact, the title Star Wars does not even show up at all in the film. It's a side story that takes place in the Star Wars universe. Disney plans to make more of these Star Wars side stories, so to me, it makes sense that they would do things that make these kind of movies stand out from the movies that are part of the main saga. It was for this reason that I had hoped that it didn't have an opening crawl. This kind of opening really paves the way for the rest of the film, in that it's Star Wars, but has a very different feel than any other Star Wars movie. Whereas all other Star Wars movies are basically sci-fi fantasy adventures, this was more of a gritty war movie. I mean, it was still Star Wars. It clearly took place in the Star Wars universe and had Star Wars things, but it had more of a war drama feel to it. It is like a different genre within the Star Wars universe. This is a big risk that Disney made, but I felt that it worked. I feel that it worked because this movie actually helps connect the prequel trilogy into the original trilogy, and even though the style is very different, the ending of this movie makes you want to go straight home and watch Episode 4. It ties directly into the original movie. So what's the movie about? Well, basically it's about a girl named Jyn Erso, who gets recruited by the rebellion to find her father because they had received intel that the Empire is building a massive weapon, which her father helped build. Jyn Erso agrees to help, and they go meet a guy named Saw, who once was a rebel ally and friends with the Erso family. An Imperial pilot who defected from the Empire gave Saw a message from Jyn's father about a weakness that Jyn's father had made in the Death Star. Jyn sees this message, and the pilot says he knows where Jyn's father is, so they go and find her father. However, the planet is dangerous to fly in, and they crash. Since the rebel base loses contact with Jyn and her team, they send a strike force to blow up the lab, which ends up killing Jyn's father. Jyn and her team return to the rebel base and tells them about the Death Star. However, many of the rebel leaders are too afraid to openly attack the Empire. Jyn and her team steal an Imperial shuttle and they travel to a highly secured Imperial base that has the Death Star plans. Jin and two others sneak in the base, while the remaining members of her team openly attack the base to cause a diversion. Other rebel forces eventually join her, and a big battle ensues. Jin eventually gets the plans and broadcasts the plans to the rebel fleet. And the movie ends with the rebels retreating with the stolen plans being pursued by the Empire, ending right where A New Hope begins. Going into this movie, I didn't really know what to expect. I could tell by the trailers and advertising that this movie had a different feel from the typical Star Wars. It was about characters that we had never heard of, and again centered around the Death Star. But the closer to the release date we came, the more excited I became. After all, it was still Star Wars, but I just didn't know what to expect. That being said, this movie definitely exceeded my expectations. Some of my friends had commented that they expected to see more of a spy movie. At first, I wasn't sure where this expectation came from, since all the trailers advertised the film as more of a gritty war drama. But the spy movie expectation seemed to be common among many of my friends. I suppose the overall plot could lend itself to be of the spy genre. After all, the plot is about sneaking into an Imperial base to steal the Death Star plans. So, considering that, I could see how there would be an expectation for a spy movie. Not to mention that this movie is essentially the story that is explained in the opening crawl of A New Hope, which specifically states, "It is a period of civil war. Rebel spaceships, striking from a hidden base, have won their first victory against the evil Galactic Empire. During the battle, Rebel spies managed to steal secret plans to the Empire's ultimate weapon, the Death Star, an armored space station with enough power to destroy an entire planet." Oh yeah, the opening crawl specifically mentioned Rebel spies. Well, I will say that the movie does not deviate from this plot point. A small group of rebels do disguise themselves as Imperials, sneak into a top-secret Imperial base, and steal the Death Star plans. And Jyn Erso's father was technically a rebel spy working on the inside. But the movie itself does not play out as a spy movie. Again, it's definitely more of a gritty war movie, as advertised. I actually really liked how this movie feels and plays differently than a Star Wars saga movie, because this is just a side story. Or, as the title states, a Star Wars story. It makes sense to me that these type of movies will be different than the normal Star Wars feel to set them apart from the main saga. I can see how some would not like this difference and may even have issues with it because it doesn't feel like a normal Star Wars movie. And they are right. It doesn't. I think Disney and Lucasfilm took a risk with this film. It was kind of an experiment. But I personally believe that it worked well and paid off. Now that being said, there were a few things that did seem off to me, or didn't quite work in the film. I think the biggest issue with this movie was the lack of character development. I mean, for one, I could hardly tell you any of the characters' names. Let's see, there was Jyn Erso and Cassian Andor. And then there's Galen Erso and Krennic. But I mostly only remember those because I read the book Star Wars Catalyst, which was primarily about their friendship during the Clone Wars and the early years of the Empire. Then there was Saw, who is also in the Clone Wars TV series, and he's rumored to be in the Star Wars Rebels as well. And the droid, I think, was like K2 something something. Yeah, and the rest of the main crew of Rogue One? I have no idea. I feel like I should at least know the names of the main crew members. Let's see here. There was the pilot, the monk guy, and the monk guy's friend. I'm not even sure if his name was mentioned. I'm sure it was, but I don't remember it being stated. The big thing is, I saw this movie 4 times opening weekend, and I was realizing that after my second showing I still didn't know their names. So I went into my 3rd and 4th showing trying to pay attention to the names, and I still don't know them. This is just one example of what I mean by lack of character development. Beyond Jyn, there really was not much character to these characters. The movie didn't really give us a chance to get to know them or to connect with them. I mean, you kind of get a hint here and there with Cassian, and a little bit with Krennic, but I kind of feel like there was character development stuff missing from this film, which ties into my second issue. There seems to be a lot missing from this film. After my first showing, I had remembered a couple scenes that were in the trailer that weren't in the film. Now, I understand that this happens in movies. The Force Awakens and Lord of the Rings Return of the King comes to mind. But with those movies, it was like one or two scenes in the trailers that weren't in the movie. But when I went back to watch the Rogue One teaser trailer, I was surprised to see about half of the scenes or dialogue in the trailer were not in the film. I mean, this picture here, from the teaser, was on the very cup that the movie theaters were giving out. And it's not in the movie. Then I went back and watched the first actual trailer. And about half the scenes in this trailer, which are different from the ones in the teaser, are also not in the movie. Now I know that the trailers are made prior to the final cut, and during the editing process different things get cut for numerous reasons. But I've never seen a movie where so much of its trailers were not in the actual film. Now, in the defense of these trailers, it does advertise the movie well. They explain the general plot and the feel of the movie to the audience. But there is clearly so much missing, and many of these scenes that were in the trailer seem to be character development scenes, which again was my primary complaint for this film. I encourage you to go back and review these two trailers. I'll provide their links in the description of this video. Other things that kind of bugged me in this movie are more of little nitpicks, but I'll share them nonetheless. There were a lot of little references to other Star Wars movies in this movie, which for the most part I actually liked. But there was one that I felt was kind of out of place and shoehorned, which was C-3PO's and R2-D2's cameo. It just felt like it was there to have them say, "Hey guys, we're in the movie too." The thing that bugs me most about this is there seemed to be an obvious spot to have put them in that would have seemed natural, which would have been on the bridge with Princess Leia on the Tantive 4. Now, my least favorite scene in the movie is similar to my least favorite scene in The Force Awakens. They both have this weird, blobbish tentacle monster. In Rogue One, this monster comes off just kind of disturbing. It's awkward, and really didn't even need to be in the movie at all. I mean, if that scene was taken out, it would change absolutely nothing in the movie. Now, my next thing, it is really nitpicky, but in the beginning of the movie, when Krennic comes to get Galen, why does he land his ship so far away? It didn't bug me the first time I saw it, but each time after, I couldn't help but think about this. Another thing that kind of bugged me was the way that Saul died. Like, why didn't he at least try to run for the ship or something? Instead, he just kind of gave up. I mean, at least give us a reason that he didn't try to get to the ship. He could have been running and a part of the cave could have come crashing down, breaking his robotic legs. And then he could have said something like, "Just leave me, you won't make it if you carry me," or something. But instead, he just says, "Well, the script says I die here, so I'm going to hang back." Okay, that's not what he says, but he might as well have. My last little nitpick is something I'm not actually sure if I'm bugged by, but was something that I noticed and I thought I'd share. Which is, everyone dies the same way. They all die in an explosion. Again, not sure if this actually bothers me or not, but something that has been on my mind and actually leads me into one of the things that I really liked about this movie, which was that everyone dies. The fact that this movie actually killed off all their main characters really surprised me. The way they did it was overall well done, except Saul's death. Each one had their own moment, and each death was spaced out just enough for you to feel their death before the next one went down. I also liked the irony in that how Krennic is killed by the Death Star, which is the very thing that he was in charge of building and the very thing that he had aspired to control. I see poetry in that Jyn is also killed in the same Death Star blast, which is the very weapon that her father built. Now, had the characters been a little more developed, and had the movie taken the time to really connect the audience with these characters, their deaths would have been even more impactful. But even with the characterization that the film does supply, their deaths still hit the heartstrings. Each time that I've seen the movie, I still tense up when each character is about to die. Not only was it well done cinematically, but I was impressed that the movie was willing to kill off all their characters, leaving no room for a sequel movie with these characters. Furthermore, it really makes you appreciate what it took for the rebels to get the Death Star plans, and it really gives you new meaning when you watch the beginning of A New Hope, which is essentially the continuation of the climatic battle of this movie. And speaking of battles, the fight scenes and the battles in this movie were really well done. In particular, the last third of the movie just grabs you and won't let you go. The movie really picks up. It's interesting, intense, and you don't want to miss any of it. Also, I really enjoyed that we got to see a different side of the rebellion. They had to do some shady stuff from time to time. They weren't just squeaky clean good guys, and particularly Cassian. I wish they would have kind of developed that a little bit further though. Also, I liked how this movie gave new meaning as to why the weakness in the Death Star existed. Some had seen this as a plot hole in A New Hope, and would say something like, why didn't the Empire just cover up that hole? Others have criticized the plot point as being too convenient, but Rogue One addresses this issue by saying that the flaw was intentionally made by Jyn's father so that the rebels would have a chance to destroy it. And as one of the chief scientists that helped create the Death Star, he was able to hide this flaw. Now this brings me to the next thing that I really liked about this movie, which was the Death Star itself. Here we really got to see the scope and the power of the Death Star. Yes, we saw it blow up Alderaan in A New Hope, but it just kind of blows up. We know it's bad and that a lot of people must have died, and we may have felt something about that. But in this movie, we really feel the power this weapon has, because we see it firsthand from the view of the planet that gets hit by only a partial of its power. You witness the terror. It was really well done, and again kind of gives new meaning to when Alderaan was destroyed. On this note, my wife had mentioned something that kind of got to me. There's a scene in the movie where there is a little battle between stormtroopers and some rebels, and there is a child caught in the crossfire, and Jyn goes and saves the kid and returns the kid to the parent. The family must have gone home, relieved that their kid was not hurt, thinking that they were safe, only to be blown up by the Death Star. When she brought that to my attention, that kind of got me. Now, one of my favorite characters in this movie was K2SO. Yeah, I had to look up the rest of his name. He was definitely the comic relief, but yet not so much so as to take away from the story or his character. It's always good when your comic relief character is not just there to be the comic relief. K2SO was an Imperial droid that was reprogrammed by the rebels. His jokes weren't of the typical ha-ha humor, but more of a blunt meanness kind of humor, which I thought was unique and well done. Along with having some of the best lines in the movie, it was his death scene that probably hit me the most out of any of the characters. It was the first death of the main group, it was sacrificial, and after his death, you start to wonder if any of them are going to come out of this mission alive. Another of my favorite characters in this movie was the blind monk Chirrut Imwe. I had to look up his name too. He's the spiritual member of the team, and he has some kind of connection with the Force. He is not a Jedi, nor has he really honed his ability with the Force. For him, it acts as more of a way to perceive the outside world. In a sense, it is what allows him to see. He is the only mystical person on the team and had some great dialogue and some pretty cool fight scenes, kind of similar to Daredevil. He had some funny moments, and one of my favorite moments is when they get captured by Saul's rebels and they bag everyone, and then they bag Chirrut, to which he replies, "Are you kidding me? I'm blind." It was a good moment and a good laugh. One of the things that particularly fascinates me with this character is that he is stated to be a guardian of the Whills. This is actually pretty big, because the Whills is one of the obscure Star Wars mysteries that is rarely talked about. In fact, most fans probably have never even heard of the Whills before. Yet, the Whills have been part of Star Wars lore from the beginning conception of Star Wars. In 1973, one of the earliest notes George Lucas wrote on Star Wars was titled Journal of the Whills. From what I could gather, the Whills are basically an immortal, maybe even a spiritual kind of being, almost a deity in the Star Wars universe. George Lucas had a prophecy written in the original 1974 draft of Star Wars, which states, "And in the time of greatest despair there shall come a Savior, and he shall be known as the Son of the Sons." Journal of the Wheels, 3/127. According to George Lucas, the original concept of the wheels was a narrative device in that the story of Star Wars is actually being told by the wheels. The story of Star Wars is stated to be written in a book called The Journal of the Wheels. In the original novel, which was published in 1976, about 6 months before the film was released, the prologue is stated to be an excerpt from the Journal of the Wheels. Furthermore, the novelization of The Force Awakens begins with a poetic prophecy from the Journal of the Wheels, and is again quoted with a chapter and a verse, similar to how one would quote the Bible. Lastly, there is a portion of the script of Episode 3 that was cut from the movie that directly speaks about the wheels. This takes place near the end of the movie, where Yoda is communing with the spirit of Qui-Gon. In this scene, Qui-Gon says, "The ability to defy oblivion can be achieved, but only for oneself. It was accomplished by a shaman of the wheels. It is a state acquired through compassion, not greed." Later on in the movie, Yoda would tell Obi-Wan that he has training for him from his old master. Now this was mentioned in the movie, however the script went in a little more detail. In the script, Obi-Wan asks how he will be trained by Qui-Gon, to which Yoda says, "The secret of the ancient order of the wheels he studied. How to commune with him I will teach you." But, like I said, none of this dialogue was actually in the movie. Rogue One is the first movie to officially mention anything about the wheels, and now officially makes the wheels Star Wars canon. Another character that I really liked was Krennic. He was the antagonist in this movie, and I'm not sure what it is about him that I liked. He definitely could have used a little bit more character development and a little bit more screen time. He really didn't do too much in the movie, but I really liked the way that the actor had played him. It was kind of overly dramatic, but I don't know, he seemed to have fun with it, and it just really caught my attention. Now, as I had mentioned, there were quite a few cameos and reoccurring characters in this movie. Now, with the exception of C-3PO and R2-D2, I really liked seeing characters from the already established Star Wars universe. And again, my issue with the droids was not that they were in the movie, but how they were in the movie. Now, some of these recurring characters had a larger role in the movie than others. Some were only talked about. Though there was one that had a fairly big role in the movie, which was Grand Moff Tarkin. They made Tarkin look identical to how he looked in A New Hope. Considering that the actor Peter Cushing died in 1994, it took me a second to realize that it was CGI. At first, I wondered if it was another actor that really looked like Peter Cushing, and then they did some makeup or something. But then I realized that the detail that the character had to the original actor could have only been done by CGI. Now, many have stated that this was obvious and distracting to them, but each time that I've seen the movie, it looked pretty damn good to me. I honestly could hardly tell, if at all. I was really happy to see Tarkin in this movie, as the plot is about the creation of the Death Star, which is always connected with Tarkin. As mentioned, Saw Gerrera was a recurring character from the Clone Wars cartoon. The characters from the cartoon Star Wars Rebels was seen and mentioned in the movie. Chopper could be seen in the shot outside of Yavin Base, and the ship Ghost could be seen in the battle above Scarif. And Hera Syndulla was specifically called for over the intercom on Yavin. Now she's a general. As seen in the trailers, Mon Mothma is in the movie, playing her role as the leader of the rebellion. Also in the movie was Bail Organa, which is the adoptive father of Princess Leia. And there was a pretty cool scene where Mon Mothma and Bail Organa talk. Mon Mothma asks about getting help from Bail's Jedi friend, referring to Obi-Wan. And Bail agrees and says that he will send someone to get him. Mon Mothma then replies, "It needs to be someone you trust." To which Bail Organa replies, "I would trust her with my life." Which of course is referring to Leia, giving a little more detail about why Leia was sent to get Obi-Wan in A New Hope. Now Leia was also in the movie. Here we see her 21-year-old face CGI'd on an actress. Now her CGI was a little more noticeable to me, but she was only in the movie for like 2 seconds, so it wasn't really that distracting. She also has the last line of the movie, which was hope, which again connects right into A New Hope. Now I should mention that her stating hope definitely seemed to be a sound bit from the way she says it in A New Hope. Now there are other rebels in this movie that were also in the original movies, which include General Dodonna, who was the one giving the Death Star battle brief at the end of A New Hope, and then Red Leader and Gold Leader, which were X-Wing and Y-Wing pilots in A New Hope, were at the end space fight in this movie. And I had heard that they'd used unused clips from A New Hope for their scenes. There was even a character with the call sign Red 5, which was Luke's call sign in A New Hope. This Red 5 dies in the space battle, which gives an explanation as to why Luke was Red 5 when there was already a Red 6 in A New Hope. Captain Antilles is in a scene in this movie as well. He tells his men to make sure the escape pods are ready to go, and then delivers the transmission of the Death Star plans to Leia. In A New Hope, Captain Antilles is the guy who Vader interrogates by picking him up by the neck with one hand and crushes his throat. Also in a little cameo scene, Ponda Baba, also known as Walrus Man, and his friend Dr. Cornelius make a small appearance. And these were the guys in A New Hope, in the cantina scene, that didn't like Luke. But the best cameo appearance has to be Darth Vader. He is only in the movie for 2 scenes. The first Vader scene takes place in his palace, which I believe is on Mustafar, the lava planet where Obi-Wan and Anakin had their epic duel in Revenge of the Sith. At first we see him in a Bacta tank outside of his suit. It was cool to see him humanized and really get a glimpse of how severe his wounds were, similar to how Empire Strikes Back revealed the back of his head. The scene continues with him now in his black suit, talking with Krennic. Near the end of the scene, Krennic gets a little overly ambitious. In reply, Vader begins to force choke him and says, "Be careful not to choke on your aspirations, Director." Now some have taken issue to this pun, but Vader has always had a bit of sense of humor. In Empire Strikes Back, Vader has some very funny lines. For example, when it was first revealed that Lando betrayed Han in Cloud City, the door opens to reveal Vader is at a dining table. Vader says, "We would be honored if you would join us." Like they have a choice. I had always thought of this line as a little humorous. One of my favorite lines in Empire is when Captain Needa loses the Millennium Falcon. He tells his crew that he will personally apologize to Vader. The next time we see Captain Needa, he's being force choked by Vader and dies, in which Vader then says, "Apology accepted, Captain Needa." So, I have no issue with Vader making a little pun here. It seems in line with the character. I also liked how they made Vader's costume nearly identical to the costume that he wore in A New Hope, which is a little different from the one that he wears in the other movies. But the best Vader scene in this movie, and in my opinion the best scene in this movie, was the ending. The rebels receive the transmission of the Death Star plans, but their cruiser is going down. They download the plans and evacuate. However, due to the damage that the cruiser has taken, the door gets jammed, and it only opens enough to put a hand through. They try to unjam it, but then they hear someone come in the hallway with them. You hear the footsteps, and then the breathing. Vader ignites his lightsaber, and you just see the terror on the rebels' faces. The scene plays out like a horror movie. Vader blocks blaster fire with his lightsaber, slashes it around, uses the force to lift a couple of them up, and slams them around. He kills a couple more, and then he takes all their blasters away with the force, and he just slaughters them. The last rebel by the door screams for help, and gives the plans through the crack of the door to a rebel on the other side, as he is impaled through the door by Vader's lightsaber. Vader gets through the jammed door and kills those in his way as the rebel with the plans just barely gets away. It was a badass Vader moment that we have all been waiting for. We get something close in Empire when he fights Luke, but he is holding back in the battle because he's trying to capture Luke. Here, it was Vader unleashed, and it was awesome to see on the big screen. Alright, so those were pretty much all the things that I liked and disliked. I will now get into my grading aspect of the review, and I'll start with the acting. The movie was wonderfully acted. I particularly enjoyed the actor who played Krennic, but all the actors did a really great job. I'll give the acting for this movie an A+. Next, the directing. The directing was really well done. Great camera work and different perspectives. I really enjoyed how the director made use of size and scope. One of my favorite shots was seeing the weapon dish of the Death Star being installed and seeing it compared to the Star Destroyers. And then seeing the Death Star at the end of the movie when it first appears in the sky over Scarif. Not to mention the use of the AT-ATs. And like I said, the battles were really well done. I also really appreciated how much it looked like A New Hope in terms of the costumes and the props. And also, it wasn't overly reliant on special effects. In fact, there were many practical effects in this movie. So the directing gets an A+ as well. The screenplay was well written, the dialogue was well written, and the jokes worked. I appreciated that the scope of the movie was smaller. It was more of a side story than an epic, which is what it needed to be. The pacing was pretty good for the most part, though it did seem a little choppy in the beginning. My biggest complaint would be the lack of character development, and maybe that is more of an editing thing than the screenplay, assuming that the character development scenes were cut. And Saw's death did seem a little lazy to me, so the screenplay will get overall an A-. The music was pretty good in this movie, but it is clearly not John Williams. The music is a little more subtle. It didn't particularly stand out in my first viewing, though in my second viewing I did pay more attention to the music and did end up really appreciating it. Overall, I'll give the music an A-. Now, Star Wars Magic. This category is a little tricky because this movie really is a different genre altogether. So by its very nature, it's not going to feel like a Star Wars movie. Yet, despite it intentionally not feeling like a Star Wars movie, it still worked in the Star Wars universe. Like I said, this movie, particularly the ending, really makes you want to go straight into A New Hope. And I know that this is true for many people who have seen this movie, to include my wife. So if that's not Star Wars magic, then I don't know what is. So I'll give this category an A. So overall, I'll give this movie an A. It was a great movie, entertaining, well written, and the last half was just amazing. I strongly recommend it. This concludes this review. May the Force be with you.